Hey afternoon geographers! Apologies for the lack of content over the last few days, been a bit busy, been my wife's birthday, also our anniversary, life gets in the way sometimes. But the content is still coming, don't worry. So what we're going to be going through in this video is the 24 marker. Now your 24 marker, this is the last test, the final test of the A-Level Geographer, the one thing standing in the way of you finishing your A-Level Geographers. So treat it as such. It's your last chance to show off what you've got, to show off what you've learned. It brings in all the skills, all of the data from the resource pack, all of your knowledge from elsewhere in the specification, and you have to formulate some kind of debate, some kind of argument that ultimately finishes with a justified judgment, finish off that A-Level Geography. And once you've finished, you can walk out of that exam room like that. Now the good news is, those of you that have watched my 18 marker video, it's not too dissimilar from the skills and the competencies that you have to demonstrate in the 18 marker, only the questions are a little bit broader and there's slightly more emphasis on you bringing in stuff from your wider studies. If you have a look at the mark schemes, it doesn't necessarily say this, but if you have a look at the examiner's reports, as you can see, evidence of using those wider studies is the way that you can elevate the level of your response. So let's get into it. So just a quick one before the video continues. Those of you that feel like you missed out on the Paper 3 Masterclass, you can still buy the recordings of the 3 2-hour sessions that I ran. In addition to this, obviously there's resources where you can practice the Paper 3 skills. The link for this is in my bio, so you'll get access to the recordings, you'll get access to the resources. What you'll also get access to is I'm doing another 2 bonus sessions for Paper 3 specifically, and these will be on Monday evening 7 till 9 p.m. and then there's the Q&A that I'll be running the night before to get those last minute questions answered. Okay, back to the video. So we break it down into our AO1 skills, AO2 skills and AO3 skills for this particular mark tariff. Okay, so there are 4 marks available for AO1 skills, 12 marks available for the AO2 and 8 marks available for the AO3. So as you can see, 67% of those marks are available for your AO1 and your AO2. So we'll go through what those skills are now. So AO1, this is your knowledge, your theories and your concepts from your wider geography. It's being able to utilise that wider knowledge that you've gained from the 2 years of study of A-Level Geography. It's bringing in things like your case studies that might be relevant that aren't necessarily mentioned within the resource pack. And the examiners will credit you very heavily for there being that kind of information contained within your answers, because it's not been given to you. So this is you taking the initiative and finding those parallels between your wider studies and the stuff that's in the resource pack. Then we move on to our AO2. Now this is where we're bringing in that skill of using the concepts and the theories, and we use these theories to formulate judgments. This is where obviously the most marks to be gained are. What we'll see when we come on to the AO3 skills is that a lot of the examiner's reports often report that sometimes students will lean too heavily on that AO3 stuff. This is where the examiner wants to see your skill set shine. And this is where yet again we can bring in that beautiful wheel of AO2. We've got certain places where certain rules might not apply, or certain arguments might not apply. There'll be spatial scales where again we can start to counter our argument. Yes, maybe our argument is relevant at the local scale, but what about that global scale? There'll be time scales again over which our argument might not apply. So yes, sure, in the short term, maybe this argument stands true, but what about the long term? Then we've got our future uncertainties. So yes, right now this argument is true, but going into the future, maybe things can start to happen that might decrease the degree to which our argument is true. And then of course there is stakeholders to consider. So for some people from certain perspectives, yes, this argument might be true, but from other perspectives, it may not be true. So once again, signaling the importance in the 24 marker, 67% of the marks here are going to be available for you from your AO1 and your AO2 skills. It's not just about quoting from the resources. Don't let the resource pack do the work for you. You've got to do the work to decipher what stuff in the resource pack is going to be relevant to formulate your argument. And then finally, we've got our AO3 skills. This is when our analysis comes in. Now, with analysis, remember, manipulation of that data source is going to be well credited. Things like percentage change, multiples, that kind of thing. This is what's going to be relevant in your AO3. This is what's going to be credited. So whereas you shouldn't lean too heavily on your AO3, you shouldn't lean too heavily on gathering the right data from the resource pack, it is still necessary to engage with that resource pack. And once again, what is going to be credited very highly in this is not just using the final section. So normally it's something like section D or section C, depends how many sections there are, but also utilizing all of the data from sections A, B, and C, or any of those earlier sections to also boost the evidence base within your arguments, or even form those counter arguments from things that you've noticed in A, B, and C. So these are the core competencies that you need to do well in your 24 marker. This for me signals the importance of doing a pre-plan. So what on earth is a pre-plan? A pre-plan would be, if I didn't have the resource pack, how would I go about answering this question? So what's the rationale for a pre-plan? Well, that pre-plan almost kind of gets us into that mindset of, I know I've got to bring in my own knowledge to this. I know I've got to bring in theoretical concepts that could almost back up what's in the resource pack or counter what's in the resource pack. So it ensures that we're not leaning too heavily on the resources. So let's look at this 24 marker example, which is a classic example of a 24 marker in a paper 3. All right, so we'll break it down as we always do. Remember, we read it once, we read it twice, and then we look at the second two words after evaluate, and it is the view. Then we think about it. What's our view on trial here? The view on trial, Japan's status as a superpower is unsustainable. So then, because it's a view, we're either going to agree with this view to a certain extent, or we're going to disagree with it to a certain extent. Well, the thing that we can evaluate here is this concept here, that their status is unsustainable. So we look in the question for our opportunities for evaluation. That, to me, if you've got something like a superpower status within your paper 3, you know that you can evaluate in various ways, because superpower status is all built up around this idea of the pillars. So I know I'm going to have to get some theoretical concepts in there. The pillars is a great way to do that. What other theoretical concepts can I have? We've got soft power, we've got hard power. And this is what you need to do. When you see the question, before you even engage with the resource pack and before you even start planning it, you've got to do this pre-plan activity. So what theories am I going to get in? This is definitely going to be a theory. Pillars, I need to talk about the pillars. I need to talk about soft power. I need to talk about hard power. I need to get in modernization theory, I need to get in world systems theory. These are the things that the examiner is going to be looking for you to include. Getting that AO1 in there, getting that AO2 in there, and helping you use these concepts here to formulate those judgments. And even on this side here, when we're thinking about sustainability, that idea of sustainability, we can break it down into different areas of sustainability. Yeah, so economic, social, political, cultural. We can evaluate based on all of these things here. So once we've started to generate theories that might be relevant to this, we can then start to do our pre-plan activity. So our pre-plan activity is, what would we write if we didn't have the resource pack at our disposal? And you want to keep this nice and broad. Breadth is key here, because obviously the resources are necessary, and you've got to make your arguments relevant to what's in the resource pack. You can't ignore it completely, otherwise you won't pick up any of those AO3 marks. But you can start to, generally speaking, think about what would threaten a nation's superpower status and which of these apply to Japan. So on the agree side, we might think about things like, first one might be, okay, so from what I know about Japan and our wider studies, I know that they've got an aging population, and that relates to the resource pillar. This could even relate to something like social sustainability of them as a superpower status. There's that concept, isn't there, of demographic weight. So when I'm starting to formulate things to look out for in the resource pack on this side. Something else. What about the impacts of hazards in Japan? Surely that's got to have some impact on their superpower status if they're having to continually spend a percentage of their GDP on cleanup activities. Again, from our wider studies, I know that Japan isn't necessarily too energy secure. It doesn't have a good supply of its own fossil fuels. It doesn't necessarily have a good supply of rare earths or any of the other minerals. So maybe they're reliant on imports. So we could be looking out for these things here. All right, now this is before I've even engaged with the resource pack. It's things that I'm looking out for. As you can see, that didn't take very long at all. And you don't want to labour this. You want to give yourself that pre-planned lens to look at the resource pack. And if any of these things then don't come up, you can say, well, the resource pack did didn't give us information on this, and this is still going to be relevant to their superpower status. So have that. Now on the disagree side, obviously we're thinking about ways that we can reduce the degree to which this argument is true. In which areas does Japan show strength as a superpower? Well, what do I know about Japan? It's exported a lot of culture in the form of anime, so that cultural pillar of power is a tick. Maybe they can maintain some sort of superpower influence culturally with exporting their various products from that country. It means they're a soft power. They have a strong economy. They've always had a strong economy. Even though they lack the resources, even though they've got an aging population, innovation has always been a strength in Japan, particularly in the area of robotics. So things like AI, automation of labour forces, particularly with their manufacturing sector, could be something that reduces the degree to which all of this will threaten their superpower status. And then we can even start to pre-plan and preload ourselves for the conclusion. Now, the conclusion in your 24 markers in paper 3, for me, normally it takes 2 parts. So with that, we can think about areas or certain perspectives where we would agree with the view and areas where we wouldn't agree with the view, and then maybe think about what would our overall judgment be. So on the agree side, it might be something like, well, their ability to project hard power, the demographics does weaken their superpower status, and over time, will that weaken it sufficiently to the point where it's no longer a superpower? Will things like automation reduce the degree to which that's true? It's a future uncertainty in many respects. So ultimately the viewpoint will be something along the lines of, it depends from the perspective that we look at it from. Being a superpower is made up of many different things, and in some respects, yes, their superpower status is unsustainable. To a certain degree, it's not. They still have these core strengths as a superpower. Conclusion done. Now that's the pre-plan. That's just the pre-plan. Then we go to the resource pack. So as we've already established, AO3 is still very important. You do still have to engage with that resource pack. So once we've done our pre-plan, that's when we engage with what data can we see that backs up any of our agree points. So we scour through the AO3 pack. And this is when our scan and summarize skill becomes very useful to us indeed. If you haven't watched my scan and summarize video, I would probably pause this video right now and go and watch the scan and summarize video, or make sure that you watch it afterwards. So the first thing we have to do is obviously scan and summarize that final section that we've not been required to look at yet. And it will normally be section C or section D. It depends how many sections the resource pack's got, but normally it's section C and section D. It's absolutely essential that we bring in these sections because we've been asked to look at the entire resource pack, usually including these. So first of all, we have to do that scan and summarize and say each of the figures in section C or D or in that final section, what does it say? And then it's about seeing where they fit into our pre-plan. So is there anything on demographics? Well, yeah, I can see something from demographics. So it might be, for argument's sake, I'm going to use figure 10, for example, over there. And then there's another area where section C and D actually relates to the disagree side, and that is figure 11. So it's matching the resource to the different sides of the argument. Some areas in the resource will back this up, some areas in the resource will back this side up here. So you're basically trying to find in the resource pack what data gives us an indication that we can agree with the statement, what data gives us an indication that we disagree with that statement. We're still just kind of combing through at the moment. We're finding ways of bringing the AO3 skill into our essay. And then to show that higher level skill of being able to use multiple resources or multiple figures to back up any of the arguments that we might make, back up this argument further with something from maybe section B. So I noticed something in section B that I could also use to back up this point over here. So that would be an aim from me, really, is to not just utilize section D. It would be in every paragraph, try to choose something or choose some piece of data where you are choosing it from the final section, but then backing it up with something from either section A or section B to show that you've got that skill of utilizing multiple parts of the resource pack to back up what you're trying to say. So that's the AO3 skill that we're building in here. So we've created our points, we've backed it up with the AO3. Now what we need to do is obviously show off those AO1 and AO2 skills, and that's when we wrap the theory around the points and the AO3 data that we've already established is going to be relevant for this essay. And then we're just going back to good old paragraph structure. So your paragraphs will essentially look a bit like this. Okay, so on the agree side, our paragraph will take this form. We need a clear point. We then need some AO3 from section C or D, or that final section. And this is really important. So this is where our AO2 and our AO1 come into our response. We've got to explain why this here backs up this point here. We've got to get to that point of how is this relevant in our discussion about Japan's superpower status being unsustainable. And this is where we can bring in our superpower theory. Then obviously we can bring in some further evidence to show we've got that competency of bringing in other areas in the resource pack. So that's our A, our B, or C if there's further sections back, if it's say the final section is D. Further explain why this is relevant, add some further theory in there to suggest why this is also relevant to our understanding and related to this. And then the final part of the paragraph is obviously thinking about the data source. This is a skill that you've already gained from your NEAs. You can think and you can look back, right, well this data here obviously only gives us data up to the year 2017. What about more recent data? What about future projections? We've not got that. So the strength of our argument is only as strong as the data we've been given. And that's a nifty little skill because it's still evaluation, but it's evaluation in a different way. It's kind of AO3 evaluation. And then, obviously, on the disagree side, that's when we're taking our wheel of AO2 concept. We're thinking about how can we counter this point here. And again, AO2 is all about perspective. So from what perspective can we consider this a weakened argument? And it might be something along the lines of, for some pillars this is true, but what about the other pillars that we might not have looked at? Or any of the other things that might have been on our wheel of AO2. So is it always true in certain places? Maybe it's true for Japan, but there might be other places where they've managed to turn around the aging population. There might be timescales over which this could prove a weakened argument. There could be future uncertainties around things like automation, AI. There could be certain places that would consider Japan a superpower and certain places that wouldn't consider them a superpower. So it depends on the perspective of the observer. Any of these things can come in and the examiner will appreciate you thinking about the issue from a different perspective and discussing it further and finding ways to counter the argument that you've already made. Just like in an 18 marker, but obviously trying to build in that emphasis of somewhere in your essay, bringing in that all-important AO1 from your wider studies. I've been getting a lot of questions about how many paragraphs should I do? What's long enough? Now the answer I give to this is always right. If you're going for like the best answer possible, time permitting, if you can work efficiently enough, you would be going for something like 3 arguments on this side, 3 arguments on this side, and then following it up with a conclusion. Now how possible is that going to be for the majority of us? The majority of us may not even get there. So don't worry too much if you're not hitting this. If you can comfortably hit 2 and 2 and a conclusion, so that's 2 arguments in favour of the view, 2 arguments against. You've got plenty of evaluation in there, you've got plenty of engagement with the data, multiple evidence of engaging with the resources, analysis of that data. Don't forget to manipulate that data, so do things like percentage changes as I've talked about in your 8 marker essays, your 8 marker questions. Then the examiner has everything that they need to put you in that level 4 bracket. You've got balance, you've got evaluation in the form of a conclusion. Within the paragraphs you're showing all these competencies here. So that's it. 24 markers are not that much scarier than 18s. But it is all about the setup. You've got to set yourself up to demonstrate those competencies within your paragraph. Break down the question just as you would with a 20 marker. Get engaged with a little bit of a pre-plan that gives you that lens to look at the data, and also it ensures that you're going to bring in all of those theoretical concepts. You might be able to bring in a bit of your AO1 as well from your wider studies, and the examiners do credit that highly in your paper 3. And finally, just enjoy it. This is the last chance you've got to do some A-level geography. Yeah, and it might have been hellish for you, but it's your chance to just say, do you know what, I'm going to enjoy this, I'm going to really lean into it, I know what I've got to do, I'm just going to give it my best shot. Most of us aren't going to get 24 out of 24, but it doesn't mean that you can't do very well indeed if you just stick to the theoretical core concepts of how to do well in an evaluate style question. Make sure you're bringing in that AO3, bring in that AO2, bring in that AO1, then enjoy a nice long summer. Okay, thanks for tuning in again. This is probably going to be the last video that I do in terms of like your paper 3 skills. So hope you've enjoyed it, hope you found it useful, and all the best. I hope you do well.